This is Unfragmented, inspired by Colossians. For by him were all things created, that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. Join our book club as we pursue a more consistent Christian life.
All right, welcome to Unfragmented, where Lee Bortons and I, Kevin Novak, explore the cohesion of things believed with things done. What does that mean? Well, Christian thought and Christian action, linking the two. So we think about how to act, and then we go out and do it. Today is Thursday, March 30, 2023. I'm Kevin Novak. Lee Bortons is our co-host. She's not here today. She's out and about doing her thing, but I'm sure she'll be back next week and helping us with her wisdom and insights. This whole month of March, I have to remind myself, this year's already going fast, but this whole month of March, we've been talking about knowledge and power, the information theory of capitalism. This is Mr. George Gilder's book, one of his wonderful books. And we were blessed to have George on a couple times this last month. That's one of the goals we have here on Unfragmented, is to have on an author to share his or her insights with us. So next week we are going to be discussing, for the whole month of April, that is Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. I have not yet read the book. I was hoping to get it from Amazon about a week ago. It hasn't shown up yet, but I do look forward to reading that, and I hope you do too. So we'll be reading Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. Now, if you remember, last week, Lee prompted us to come back this week with some quotes. 3 quotes she challenged us to come back with, and I will just prompt everyone now. I've got some quotes here, but I just prompt y'all, if you have a quote right now, you can go ahead and jump right in if you have something you want to share.
All right, I've got
Julie,
I've got 2
okay.
ready to go.
Okay, go ahead, Nicole.
Okay, this was both from the Reaganomics. I don't know how to say that chapter, because I found that chapter just really interesting. But this one that says, from the perspective of information theory, regulation is mainly an effort to replace knowledge with power. And I chose that one because I felt like that just really honed in on the title of the book.
What page was that on, Nicole?
That was on page 137.
Thank you.
I really liked that chapter. So there's a lot of things I underlined. And then also from that same chapter, I underlined, knowledge is about the past and entrepreneurship is about the future. And that was us on page 140.
Yeah, that's really good. If you need to share what I have, because they're pretty much the same thing. So later in the book, George writes this is on page 281. The entrepreneur is always concerned with the future, riding on the crest of creation. And in my mind, I kind of think of a surfer, just moving forward, riding the middle, not being behind and not necessarily being ahead. But the other thing I noticed, I've been actually listening to a lot of Thomas Sowell lately. Boy, is he wonderful. And one thing I noticed was in the beginning of the book, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what you call this page. It's just right after the table of contents. There's a Thomas Sowell quote in here, and that is, how could we have gone so wrong? The short answer is that power trumps knowledge. So that goes along with what Nicole was saying. And I would like to ask everyone their opinion about whether power trumps knowledge. But do we have any other quotes out there, good quotes from the book?
I have a quote. Sorry, this is Michelle.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Okay, so I am this stuff is so far over my head that I literally am only up to page 31. So I'll just start it off with that. but it's because I just keep going back and I keep trying to wrap my head around some of this stuff. But the one thing that I underlined today that just blew my mind was dominating the new economy. This is on page 29. Dominating the new economy would be giant institutions which politics and scientific expertise would buttress, and which presumably would be too big to fail and too powerful to be challenged. And it's what stands out the most to me is exactly what I see happening worldwide, is this power that these huge corporations and these institutions have in alignment with the political governments, and how they really don't care about anything else other than the power that they are able to maintain with this partnership.
So you said that's on page 29. Do you? I do not see it on there, and
it's at the bottom of the first paragraph, the last sentence.
Oh, I see it now. Okay. Well, and you know what that reminds me of is I remember once seeing a clip about Barack Obama diagramming on a whiteboard his idea about this very thing. And George calls it, I think, if I'm understanding this portion properly, George calls it crony capitalism, where you have civil governments basically, and we see this with, I don't hate to go off on too long of a tangent here, but we've seen with a lot of these big tech organizations out in Silicon Valley, we see a lot of the same people going back and forth from those companies to the federal civil government in DC. And you see a lot of that anyway, that in civil government, they call that the Iron Triangle, Mm-hmm. And essentially with banks, we see that happening too, where the feds won't let organizations, companies fail. And so that is a problem. Is there anything else out of that quote, Michelle, that you want to share with us some insight about that, or maybe even another quote?
Well, it was just following in this understanding of how all schools of economics have its roots in the works of Adam Smith, and it's mind-boggling to me to think of what he was thinking when his book was published in 1776. I mean, it goes back that far. And this idea that the entrepreneur is really something that it will disappear. Entrepreneurialism will disappear because we will have, where is it? I read about, it was over on page 28. The great machine, in which every cog of every great governed by, or of every great gear governed by an invisible hand, functions perfectly in its time and place as smoothly and reliably as Newton's gravity. There were entrepreneurs, to be sure, but they seldom meet together without the conversation ending in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices.
Michelle, just asking you about Adam Smith. Have you read Wealth of Nations?
No.
Okay, and I have not either. Obviously, I've read parts of it and am familiar with it, but I'm curious if you or anyone else here had a favorable opinion of Adam Smith before you read George's work, and if so, has that changed? Because it sounds like the part that you just read, Michelle, about Adam Smith is negative in the sense that it didn't sound like it accounted for additional development, entrepreneurship, and surprise like George has been talking about in the book. Is that the way you understand that?
It is, yeah. And he did say in the beginning of the next paragraph, he said Smith was the greatest defender of free enterprise and open systems and untrammeled trade or trammelled trade between free people. But in his systems, the entrepreneurial creation is subsumed under the rubric of the division of labor, the extent of which, so he ordained, is determined by the extent of the market. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think I'm still favorable on Smith. I don't want to, I think George is right that that Smith was limited in some of his views, but at the same time, given the context of the world he lived in and the people he was writing to, what he said about this idea of an open system and an invisible hand that ruled the market, as long as governments did not try to interfere, then that was pretty radical and pretty amazing. And he was writing at the same time as, all the people that influenced the writing of our own Declaration of Independence and Constitution. So I think it was the beginning seeds of breaking out of that idea of mercantilism and a super closed and controlled system that was controlled by absolute monarchs, in which there was very little surprise and very, very much control and power. So I have to give him credit for breaking out of and being pretty unconventional in the time that he was writing, I think.
Well, and I appreciate that. I think I'm thankful that Michelle shared that quote with us, and I am thankful for what George has written here, because it did make me realize that not just about basically limited civil government and incentives in terms of capitalism, that it so much so has to do with entrepreneurship. Now, I don't think it's exclusively entrepreneurship or surprise. And so I think that's where I think what Jennifer is saying at least is helpful to me, because I have to remember the context of what Adam Smith was writing, and he was so very helpful. If you don't mind me just sharing a quote here, though, that I think speaks to what we're talking about now. This quote actually is from a video on, some of you are probably aware that George Gilder did a lot of interviews with Peter Robinson with the Hoover Institution. And I copied this quote here from one of George's interviews, and George said, people don't really understand that the key error of Marxism was Karl Marx's belief that the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century was a final human attainment, a kind of eschaton, that the problem of productivity and wealth creation had been solved forever, and from then on, the only challenge would be how to distribute wealth rather than how to create it. And that seems to me to be, in some ways, being able to put in the same category as Adam Smith, because if Adam Smith merely wanted the market to perform and then not necessarily advance through entrepreneurship, I could see where George is group category. And I think that he gave to Peter Robinson helps me understand George's perspective on information theory relative to the development society. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyone else want to share any quotes? Any George quotes?
More than a quarter of a century.
Oh, is that the video? Yeah, we were talking before we came on. Is that Julie? Was that a part of the video?
Yeah, that's the old video that you sent, and I'll put some more resources for y'all as you guys are talking.
Yeah,
from the notes that you sent me.
Well, Yeah, thank you. So I did want to, I think this will help me get to know everyone on here a little more too. And as a sidebar, I kind of have a book club with my wife. My wife actually reads a lot of books, and then she tells me what she thinks of them. And she's been reading a lot actually about cultural Marxism and so on. But I have an ongoing book club with her. It's informal. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is, I read a book, how did it change the way that we think? How did it affect our worldview? And I could probably talk, book has changed others, and then we have
We're having some technical difficulty.
it's
It's a little choppy.
okay. Well, I can type it in the.
Is it your final paragraph in the notes I have, the Karl Marx and the Industrial Revolution? Or no? Is that what you were talking about?
No, I was actually just wondering. I put it in the chat box here about how this has affected others' worldview, about how this book has maybe affected others. Were you able to hear that question?
Yeah, we just did. It's very clear now. So you're good.
Okay.
Well, I don't mind sharing something. I feel like it maybe can kind of answer the question about my world view, maybe a little bit. But so my husband is doing this local citizens police academy, and he was telling me about this one person who's like a detective that came to talk, and then he was talking about something else about that he thinks should be a standard law to help streamline things, and why we, basically why we need the civil government to have this certain program to make things standard across the state of Texas. And immediately in my head, I was trying to fit in the ideas of information theory. I couldn't explain it to my husband at all, but that's exactly what was going in my head. I was thinking, okay, does this mean, I was trying to remember, okay, that would be low entropy or high entropy. Like I was just trying to plug it all in together. And I was doing it automatically as my husband was, telling me what this detective was saying. So it just got my brain going, even though I was not in any way able to articulate it to my husband.
Well, Nicole, are you able to explain to me low entropy versus high entropy? Because that might help me.
Okay, so I think I kind of got the idea, at least, that low entropy is the things like, I still have to go back to the book because I keep rereading it. But low entropy, my understanding would be like the things that are not the surprises. So like if it's already a law that's in existence, like a law to protect property, I feel like I at least kind of got an understanding of that. And high entropy, I know, means more surprises. But that's like about all that I feel like I've got that I can explain off the top of my head without having to like go reread parts of it again.
That's good. Yeah. And I should mention, I know most people probably won't be interested in this, but George does talk about Harold Berman in here, and Harold Berman is a good read for those that can trudge through it. It's actually 2 volumes, and Berman goes through the development of the Western legal tradition and essentially the rule of law and how we got here with the common law, Blackstone common law. I only mention that because that is huge in terms of history, not just Western history, but history in general, and how we have a low entropy society generally here for the very reasons that Harold Berman talked about in the development of the Western legal tradition and the rule of law, which is also a low entropy idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
That relates to some of the quotes I underlined, which I think ties together what you said and what Nicole said, and maybe also the worldview question. We'll see. It's on page 109, and I underlined two things on the same page. So the first one is in the second full paragraph on 109, where he says, only the low entropy carrier of reliable law can enable the upside surprises of creative capitalism. And then he goes on in the second sentence of the last paragraph, the low entropy carriers that conservatives uphold of law, property, family, and morality enable the high entropy creations of science and entrepreneurship. And it made me think, all the way back to the Bible, that the system God set up was just weights and measures. Like, that's one of the first economic laws that you see, is that he tells his people to have just weights and measures, and that only our law, property, family, morality can hold up these high entropy insertions into society of these entrepreneurs and technological inventions. So
that's good. That's really good. So is there also a way, Jennifer, that has affected how you think in your worldview, just reading that part of it?
I think it just brought a lot of things together for me, because we've been having a lot of conversations lately about just that, and as you've talked about on this book club too, that a lot of things can be upheld properly in society if we just think about the common sense wisdom that we all share. And if we fight for individual families, that those are this, sort of stabilizing principles of society. And they really are common to all. So even if people are not Christians, those things are still common to them. They may try to deny it, but at root, they really cannot. They really are common to all and known by all deep down. And that's the only thing that enables us to flourish as a society, is that acknowledgement that those things are there.
Well, it would even be something as simple as, well, if we really extended autonomy and humanism and self-law to its fullest extent, people would just drive wherever they want. And I know in some countries they do that. According to my wife, who's been to many different countries, and it's just chaotic, and that does not breed a productive society. And applying that to even something like morality, in that video that Julie posted with, and that, by the way, that part about the great philosopher Dudley Moore, that's Kevin's dry humor and sarcasm, but George talks about that, like, hey, there's a certain morality here, and this common denominator is a term he uses. And I was actually watching a video by William Lane Craig today on YouTube. I did do a lot of work today. I know I watched several videos, but I did do a lot of work today. William Lane Craig was doing a great job of explaining this very thing when it comes to morality. So it's a really, really good stuff. What about anyone else? This is just fascinating to me, where I know that when I read something, it changes me. I can't always say how, but it does. And I find that to be fascinating. Anyone else want to share with maybe how this book has changed them?
So can you hear me? So I am curious what maybe your perspectives are. If you haven't read the chapter titled The 1%, it's chapter 17, and it's talking about the 1% of where the most money sits in our country, right? The people who earn the most money. And he really sets up at the beginning of that chapter a lot about the, like, for example, in dismissing the charge that the 1% of the 1% indulge in a carnival of greed, we do not explain the real reasons for their huge wealth. And then this is on page 185. He goes on and talks about Adam Smith and a host of theories. But I guess I'm thinking about toward the end of that chapter, where he's talking about a lot of people have issue with the 1% having so much money. And then he says at the bottom of 191, the reason for the huge wealth gap is because of entrepreneurial knowledge and commitment by these people who have earned that space. He says, keeping their wealth by investing it in others, they know how to maintain and expand their holdings, and the market knows of their knowledge. But he talks earlier in that chapter about how the market, the typical person isn't necessarily coming up with all these ideas that we're benefiting from. I don't know, when you guys talk about the whole the morality topic, I'm just curious. And then he talks about all progress comes from this creative minority. And if we drive them if we suppress them with lots of regulation, we'll drive them underground. And I think Ayn Rand talks about some of that. So, yeah.
Well, Tony, and you know what I find ironic about this, and I wouldn't expect you to see this, but on page 190, I actually made a note here. I wrote Ayn Rand right there on page 190. So I did get some, I just read Atlas Shrugged last year, and one of the things I remember from that, by the way, is the bureaucrats saying, we need more power. When things fail, we need more power. But regarding what you're talking about there in that chapter, I mean, and it's okay. I'm just wondering either way. Are you struggling with that particular issue, where there is a small percentage of people that do create, and they have a disproportionate amount of wealth? Is that something that you're struggling with, or is there?
I don't know that I personally struggle with it. I mean, I know that I'm in conversation with a lot of people who write, who are like, maybe not a lot of people, but people who do talk about the quote unfairness of this 1% having so much of the wealth. And I guess part of what I'm wanting to think through is, obviously I'm not part of that 1%, but maybe I can think about how we do benefit from the fact that even if some of these wealthy people, maybe they are greedy or live immorally, but I think that's beside the point. That when it comes to what their wealth is creating, I don't think I personally have a problem with it. I mean, I do have a problem with some of the immorality that it impacts our culture, but yeah, understanding how it impacts our economic opportunities, I don't think that I would want to suppress their opportunities just so that we're equalizing the playing field. I don't believe that you should equalize the playing field just so everybody gets the same amount of resources.
Does anyone? I have some thoughts being to share in that regard relative to that chapter.
I haven't read the chapter, but what the problems I have is the rhetoric that is spewed by those that are trying to obtain power and marginalizing and degrading those that have created such wealth that we do enjoy the benefit of their creativity and their entrepreneurship. We can cherry pick, not we, meaning us on this call, but in our country, there is the cherry picking of who we can look up to that is part of this 1%, and demonizing those that we don't necessarily agree with in character or in their own politics or anything like that. So, I mean, the two that stand out to me the most would be Oprah Winfrey and Donald Trump. You know, there's just two of the most polarizing figures in our sort of political realm right now. And one is considered angelic and one is considered the devil.
Well, and I do remember, and I don't recall which chapter it was in, but I do remember that George talks about how these creators, and he gives the example of Bill Gates, saying that we can look on these people and be envious, which I think is a sin, and covet what they have. But to a large degree, I know this word carries with it a different definition, but more broadly, they're slaves to what they've created. And even Bill Gates quotes it. It says something to that effect about how he's constantly tethered to his creation. And I do think that oftentimes we look at these people as if they have it all, but that's not necessarily the case. The other thing I think of is stealing is stealing. And if we're living in a capitalistic society, we have to rely on principles and the rule of law and so on. And using force and coercion to take money from some people to give it to others, in my opinion, is stealing. And I don't think that it matters whether we're stealing from a billionaire or someone who has a lot less money, because people with very little money out there that really are quite greedy. I don't know who those people are because I can't see greed. But you know, the other thing that I think of about this is sometimes it's a tough pill to swallow in terms of looking at, I'll say liberals, but I think the better term is humanists, people who are creating, but they're not necessarily living in a moral way or the way that Christians might want them to live. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, I just mean in accord with Christian principles. That it can be too difficult to accept that God has given those people some gifts they have not given some of us. And that's a difficult thing. I know that I struggle with that. That's a theological issue. So I can appreciate George writing about that. It did seem to me that when he wrote some of these later chapters, he was more aggressive with his writing, and he let loose a little more. And I liked that. But I also think, and I think it was good that he was honest. I think honesty with these discussions and what deep issues are invoked is important. I don't know that everyone is really willing to be honest about it when they're envious of a billionaire and so on, and why they're really envious and why they think that's unfair.
I think, too, that the topic of making sure that we don't check out, you know, when we're benefiting from the 1%, and we, and then there's the slice of where the government's taking care of us in a lot of ways. I think as soon as we start checking out and we're not educating ourselves and our children how to intelligently have debates with people who, like when you look at some of our politician options, right? Like surely we could be providing a better alternative. So I would think if we could raise up the next generation, if we could focus on that as opposed to, like you said, coveting the wealth of the 1%, that could be a good place to be, is helping raise up that intelligent group of people who could, yeah.
One of the questions I did have on my list for this week is, how does classical education and thinking, Christian thinking, help create a more capitalistic society? And so, Tony, when you mention what you just did, that makes me think of that. Like we ought to be teaching the next generation these things, because the people that we work with now and people that we are stuck with for a long time, unfortunately. So there's some delay in what we teach our young people with the age of 35, which is when they become eligible to run or at least become president. But what about that? What about how classical education and Christian thinking help create a more capitalistic society? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll say just classical, at least as far as CC goes, we make a point to read original works where we're not getting the opinions of somebody's original work. You're actually able to formulate your own, understanding. And even the in challenge 1, the founding fathers' documents, just reading it firsthand to where they then can move forward. When somebody says our country was not founded on Judeo-Christian values, where they in their mind say, well, actually it was. We actually read the words. So it does create this ability for, when you approach it in the younger years classically, meaning reading original works and working through those ideas yourself. Then when they are faced, I have 3 adult children who don't always make the right choices and decisions. And of course, it doesn't guarantee even a Christian, raising our little Christians, they're not little perfect angels, that they will make mistakes. However, they're very aware of their mistake. I don't know if that makes a difference or it makes it worse, better or worse. They're very aware. And so I know for mine, just that value of reading original sources was really kind of played a key part in understanding, and then made a solid ground for them to actually stand on, because people's opinions, will be to and fro. The other thing is being in the world and not of the world. So I do think that classical education does bring the real world to our kids through a safe environment of literature, fiction and nonfiction, and it allows them to wrestle with these ideas in, a safe place where they're not actually in the experience. They're reading about it and asking questions about it. But there are so many things. Jennifer, we could go on and on about all the things. Oh.
One of the reasons I hopped on this call when I did is because I do have a set of challenge 1 kids, and we're, knee deep in economics right now. And picking up this book, it's like, it really is outside of my, my study of anything that I've ever studied before. And part of what you just said, Julie, in the original works is that I always want to make certain when I'm reading stuff like this, that if there's reference to something, that I go back or I try to investigate what it is that he's referring to. or that the author is referring to, because I want to make certain that I'm not taking on an opinion of an author that I really don't know anything about. And George Gilder, I don't know anything about him. I think that's what sort of stopped me a little bit, is that there was just so many things that I was seeing that I just felt like, okay, I need to learn about this, and I need to, but then I don't have time. But I do appreciate the fact that in classical education, my kids are learning how to discern what it is that they are reading. And they do get to talk about it with their peers and in community. And I don't know what else to say. But.
Well, and two, just caveat that, moving back to challenge B, we need to give them the foundation of logic first before we present them with these original works and authors that are writing about hard things. My poor son never heard a sermon the same way ever again after he took logic and challenge B. The questions that just come and the fallacies that they are able to detect just because they memorize the syllogisms and they memorize the things, where I think sometimes we try and just push our kids so fast through things that we didn't give them the foundations to really understand. And I think that's kind of the downfall of a modern education, is that it's a one size fits all, and it's pushing to the test, it's pushing to the things without really giving kids a foundations of true knowledge. And in order to have true knowledge, you have to have the tools like logic to Kevin, I'm sure you've experienced that with lawyers who did not take formal logic in their younger years.
Include me, unfortunately. And is part of the I just love to learn, and George has really stoked that fire for me. At the same time, I am dealing with, because I'm having to remediate my learning, which is enjoyable, but at the same time it's a patchwork. I have to kind of fix that and fix this and fix that, and then over time I'm getting better, which is it's great. But yeah, and one of the things I tell my kids, I told them in the car last night when I was bringing them home from clubs, I said, you have to ask people, how do you know? Just ask people, how do you know? What is your authority on that? Did you read the source documents like Julie's talking about? So, I think it was Michelle that was just talking about learning, and we've all touched on this, but as an adult now, giving my children a classical education like I did not get, it's disappointing that I didn't get that. I am so excited for learning now, and I just love it. I think classical education is just wonderful for parents too, and learning logic and learning about the things that we never got a chance to learn about. So does anyone else have any final thoughts on that before I close us here?
I guess just a word of a note of encouragement is that for me, this book was so dense with information and definitions and points that it was one of those books where, for me at least, I felt like if I could get one thing out of each chapter, one nugget, one maybe lifeline would be a better word than nugget, one thing to hold on to out of each chapter, then I felt pretty good about that for a first reading. And it gives me hope that when I go back, I'll be able to get those definitions nailed in a little better and understand a little other layer of what he said. And it may take me to a third reading to get to the next layer of what he said, but it was engaging enough to make me want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Lee mentioned early on that this was her 5th time reading this book, so I think we're going to glean more and more. That's impressive. But I think what this book is about is liberal government humans made in the image of God, creating things like we're ordained to do, and helping us take dominion. I think that's what the book is about. I don't know that George would agree with me if he was on right now. That's what and I'll close this with this, if you don't mind me saying so. I'm very optimistic. I love this stuff. I love the idea of Christians leading the charge and taking dominion. Lee says that a few people with a lot of faith can change the course of culture and politics, and that's what we're doing here. So continue to read, continue to work hard, continue to struggle with the material, and I think we'll be better off for it, and then we can influence others and take more ground for Jesus' kingdom. So come back next week with some Hazlitt on your mind and some good questions. And for now, thank you all for joining us on Unfragmented. Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.